Yesterday, I was watching this podcast with Gary Vaynerchuk. It was the My First Million podcast with Sam and Sean. And I paid attention to how Gary speaks. Gary, I didn't realize this up until yesterday when I actually just like sat down and paid attention to his speech. He it seems like he has a lot of ideas all at once and he starts moving in one direction and then he quickly shifts to the other uh like lane in his brain, and then he switches to another lane, and then he cuts himself off. He uses a lot of hand gestures. That is actually how I think. It's like anytime I get an idea, I have a lot of like brain activity. The Instead of like thinking linearly, my mind just fans out and thinks about all the possibilities of where I can take this conversation. And sometimes it makes it hard for me to have a straight line conversation and for me to sound coherent and for me not to cut myself off. Anyway, long story short, that is something that I've actually been trying to improve within myself and improve the mechanics of speaking and be able to tell a story linearly from A to Z and have it make sense, not deviating, not using any crutch words. That's something that I'm trying to improve. I want to create more of these videos on a daily basis because I think it's good practice. I think it's a good way to improve your speech if you're consistently speaking. Yesterday I made this video on X about me. I recently watched this podcast about Hitler from the channel called How to Take Over the World. It was sort of like a history about the life of Hitler and how he went from a nobody into power, and it covered his youth. And I didn't know much about the life of Hitler, and I didn't know much about it. And so for me, what I did know is that he was considered to be a very charismatic leader that would be able to move people with his talks, with his speeches. And I thought, I'm like, where does he get that idea? Or I'm sorry, where does he get that skill from of being able to move people in that way? And because of the podcast, I learned that when Hitler was young, right, a lot of people, like the way the person who was making that podcast made it seem as if like when he was young, he was just not very motivated, not very driven to do a lot of work. And all he was driven to do is just hang out at hostels, reading and having a lot of discussions around politics. And I thought to myself, I'm like, that's probably where he honed a lot of his skills, where he spent a lot of time discussing politics, arguing his beliefs, getting feedback from other people. And it seemed like if you look at that period of his life, it may seem as if he was just bumming out. In the podcast, they described him as a bohemian, just kind of doing his own thing, not really having a purpose in life except for just reading and discussing politics and sharing his worldviews with others and hanging out at these hostels where other people hung out. And it seemed like he was just bumming out. But like as I looked at that yesterday, I thought to myself, I'm like, maybe this was a very formative period for him of just being able to have the reps of expressing his political views, getting feedback from the people, knowing what's persuasive, what's not persuasive. And yeah, that even though you like it wasn't intentional and you wouldn't have been able to know that that's what it was, it's just like that stuck out to me as of like that period of his life getting to. It's kind of like when entrepreneurs are building a product and they spend the first, X amount of time at the beginning just sort of meeting with their customers, getting feedback from. It's kind of like the early startups that they release an minimal viable product out into the world, and then they get feedback from its first users and then make that better and make that better until eventually it has product market fit. I think that's what Hitler was doing then, which is why I want to make these videos consistently, because I want to get the reps in to be able to practice my speaking skills. Um, But then I was watching Gary Vee yesterday and I was noticing that he switches topics. He sometimes starts a tangent that he doesn't finish. Sometimes he is all over the place. And all you get a sense from watching him is a sense of enthusiasm. And sometimes he's coherent with what he's trying to say, but sometimes like he's just all over the place. And it's normal, it's part of human conversation. But you still listen to him and you still feel excited. And so this reminds me of like this framework. And it's kind of like, it makes me think of Bruce Lee when he used to say like, you know, to martial arts, there's the mechanics of it, like the making sure that you're using the right body mechanics to throw a punch, to throw a kick, etc. And then there is kind of like I forget what he called it. It was like the beast, the animal, or whatever. It's like part mechanics, part animal. I think what he meant is something that I got to experience in dancing. So in dancing, sometimes I would see people performing on stage that didn't look like great dancers, like they weren't in shape. They Their costumes were a little bit cheesy. They didn't have the best technique, but they brought in a ton of energy and a ton of passion. And I often think that in a world now where everything is becoming more and more polished and more I think that the passion, I mean, it's always been important, but I think it's going to be even more important. And so passion, or I don't know how else to describe it, like the human soul aspect of it. That's what you call it like in dancing. It's like the human soul versus the mechanics, right? If you have somebody who is a great dancer in terms of mechanics, but they have no soul, it just kind of feels dry. I would imagine it's the same way. Like I went to one time a symphony concert when I was young and I was falling asleep. It wasn't exciting at all. And they were all like very good musicians, but it lacked soul. I had another experience like that when I attended this concert with one of like this really good artist in the, I'm gonna call it the salsa scene. He was a very, very well-known artist. And before he went on stage to perform, there was another, like there was, this was at the Miami-Dade College. And so there was the college orchestra that performed before them. And they were playing okay. They sounded okay. I'm sure they were good musicians, but it just lacked soul. And then this next musician came in, and it was just like, I don't know. There's like a different quality to the music. I mean, I don't know how much technically better they were than the other people, but they just played with like it just moved you for whatever reason. And so I'm thinking now it's like instead of trying to come up with speech that is polished, that where you sound like, I don't know, a news anchor or something, because that's in my mind like the epitome of somebody that speaks well and they don't use any crutch words. They sound very, I don't know, the everything makes sense. They're very polished, but it just lacks emotion and soul and it doesn't move you. Yeah, and I'm thinking about that. I mean, for me, I've been trying to practice this ability of sounding polished and being able to deliver uh, one of these videos in a straight line without veering off. Just if I make a mistake because I pronounced a word the wrong way, or I had to think about it like I'm doing now, I had to think about it too deeply, or not deeply, but like the words weren't coming to me. I'm like, okay, I need to re-record this again. And sometimes I would make like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 takes before I would like be okay just putting it out there. And it was because maybe in the introduction I didn't say exactly the thing that I wanted to say exactly the way I wanted to say it. So yeah, it just reminded me of this. Like as I was watching Gary Vee yesterday, he was just all over the place and he was making sense. It's not like he wasn't, but there was also a lot of like tangents that he didn't complete, mispronounced words, him interrupting himself. Uh, Sometimes he was going to deliver on an idea that he started speaking about and he never delivered on it. And I always thought, I'm like, oh man, I shouldn't do that when I'm making these videos. But yeah, it just allowed me to, it just gave me more permission to put things out there that are not perfect. And I actually think, again, that's where the world is going with AI, and like AI is going to sound more and more polished. I think, people will want to see other people and like have it be real without all the extra polish. I was also watching yesterday an example of this of a there's this video that I started watching yesterday. It was called like I was a neurosurgeon for 20 years and then I quit and now I'm not doing anything, or I'm now in the mountains without a job or something like that. And the guy was there speaking very eloquent, but it wasn't like he didn't edit it at all. He was just 40 minutes of him kind of just thinking out loud essentially. And a lot of the comments were like, this is what YouTube is about. It's about like watching a real person in there with some good background and minimal or no editing. I'm thinking that people are craving this more and more. So yeah, that's what prompted me to make this video today. I'm worrying less about the delivery and more about, am I being enthusiastic? Am I conveying the idea? Even if I have to run around it, even if I'm not polished, that's totally fine. I think it's just like leaning in more into being human. So I guess that's just like for anybody who's watching, if you're making videos or if you, whatever it is like if you're forcing yourself to be polished, I'm thinking that I'm relaxing I don't know, I'm relaxing those standards for myself, I guess. I don't know, the standards. It's not like I want to sound bad, but it's like I'm thinking that I don't need to be like this perfectly polished guy. So anyway, just wanted to put this out there. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.